Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition. We're back in Southern California, broadcasting from our cold, chilly, and rainy studios here in Irvine, California. Happy to have you with us today. Happy you were able to join us when we were in beautiful Delray Beach, Florida. Let's get down to business, because folks, from the time we talked last Thursday until today, the banking system in the United States has completely changed. Let's go over a little, sort of recap a few things that happened, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But let's go through what happened here. Okay, we had Silicon Valley Bank last week. There was a run on the bank based upon the perception that the bank was not going to be able to survive. Over the weekend, Signature Bank, a New York-based bank that was mainly involved in crypto lending, was also shuttered. So the Federal Reserve, the Department of Treasury, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation got together over the weekend before markets opened on Monday, really before the Asian markets opened, and they announced that they were going to backstop all of the depositors who had put their money into these particular banks. Now, there's generally accepted, the administration got pretty good praise for the actions of the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And I'll get into some of the details in a little bit. But some people on the right have been critical, stating that no, we shouldn't have done that. Well, let me give you the pros and cons. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to side with what the administration did, because although I'm a conservative Republican, they did the right thing. And all this garbage I'm hearing about, oh well, we socialize the losses, that's all bogus arguing talking points that do not make any sense whatsoever. You had a situation where you had innocent depositors. All their crime was putting their money in these banks. Now, we're going to learn a lot more in the aftermath about some things, that requirements and why it was there. But needless to say, punishing the depositors would be the equivalent of you going to a doctor, him giving you bad news and saying, it's your fault. The depositors, their mistake, quote, mistake, was having more money in the bank beyond the deposit limits. Think about this for some of these corporations. Can you imagine having to do your payroll? Big companies now, spreading it out among 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 banks? That's impossible. Now, the money to pay for this came out of the insurance fund for which banks pay premiums. So the president was technically correct when he stated that taxpayer money would not be used. And shareholders didn't get bailed out. They took losses. Excuse me. Bondholders of the banks, they're going to take losses. So in effect, what happened here, to stem a further, what I would call a panic among depositors, I think they struck the right balance here. Because think about it, folks. If you had a perception that you have to do the due diligence on the bank before you deposit your funds there, most Americans are, in general, are not that sophisticated to be able to do that, to read a balance sheet and income statement of a bank. Heck, let's take it a step further. In the review process of what's happening here, KPMG, which was the auditing firm, gave Silicon Valley Bank a clean bill of health. The San Francisco office of the Federal Reserve, that's in charge of reviewing this particular bank, a branch of the Federal Reserve. No, they didn't catch anything. So, in the aftermath of this, you're going to have investigations. What happened? Why? Who shot John? Why did it happen? Well, we have a pretty good idea of why it happened. I'm not going to get into those specific details, but at the end of the day, the regulatory agencies charged with overseeing this, which is the San Francisco branch of the Federal Reserve, basically gave the bank a clean bill of health, as did the auditing firm, KPMG. So now, if the San Francisco Federal Reserve and one of the big auditing firms gave a bank a clean bill of health, then why did it go bad? Well, it went bad because the mix of assets that that bank had didn't turn out to be liquid enough. Meaning some of the loans they had made to some of these startup companies, they had no ability to get liquid. And the securities that they had acquired when interest rates were very low, when interest rates rose, the value of those securities went down. So when the snowball started going down the hill, they had to sell these securities to meet redemptions. Well, that was not going to solve the problem. So that's why the stock was halted trading on Friday, closed over the weekend, reopened on Monday as a new bank. So if to my fellow brethren on the right, for those who are saying, no, we should have let it fail, should not have taken care of any depositors over $250,000, you want to see mass chaos on a global scale, spearheaded in the United States, you go down that path. I happen to think the right balance was struck here because shareholders took losses, bondholders took losses. Depositors, it wasn't their fault. I don't care how much money they had in the bank, whether it was $50 million, $5 million, or $5. Now, it's a rethinking of the banking system, yes, but there's an old adage in banking, and I'm going to give it to you from an economic point of view. When you have a problem that's viewed as a systemic issue, you put the tourniquet on it and you fix the problem now, and there's time in the post-mortem to do the analysis of how it happened, why it happened, how we fix it in the future. And the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. Hopefully this is contained. Now, some of the regional banks, their stocks were pummeled yesterday. And I won't mention specific ones, that wouldn't be fair. Now, some of them have recovered today. As of the airing of the show here, Wall Street's actually up about 1%. The Dow, NASDAQ, S&P 500. So, in retrospect, I think, and again, folks, we always tell you on the show, we're going to cut through the BS and we're going to cut through the propaganda. In this case, I believe the administration acted prudently, and I believe the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, working with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, they handled this situation about as good as it possibly could be handled. And yes, we'll have time to dissect what happened. These were some of the, quote, brightest people. But again, the auditors didn't see anything wrong, and the supervisory bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, had not done anything previously on this. And then, again, think back, folks, a week ago today, their stock was trading around $200 a share. So, did we avert a crisis? Well, we have for now. It was pretty, if you had funds in either one of those banks, particularly Silicon Valley Bank, yeah, you had some problems. You weren't sure what was going to happen over the weekend. Now, it worked out okay. But just because it worked out okay doesn't mean there's more potential problems out there. When you have interest rates increase as rapidly as this has taken place, there is going to be collateral damage. And we are starting to see things that are broken now. But again, I come down and I think the administration did the right thing. And I'm not going to say they did the right thing if I didn't believe that, because I really believe they did the right thing. And again, for those on the right who are criticizing, well, we're socializing losses. No, you're not. At this point, taxpayer money has not been used. Now, that doesn't mean it won't be needed in the future. But for right now, the tourniquets work, the bleeding stopped, and we've been able to buy some time to figure out how to sort these things out. Actually, some of the stocks of the companies that got pummeled yesterday were up quite a bit today. And one more thing I want to point out on this. Even though those assets were marked down, Silicon Valley Bank had to sell them because they had to raise the capital. Now, with the line of credit that's being put in place between the Treasury and the Fed, they're going to allow you to basically take those securities that maybe, let me use a simple example, $100,000 valuation today may be 50. But if you hold it to maturity, you're going to get paid the entire balance back if you're not forced to sell it. So what the Treasury in effect did is set up a line of credit where banks could put up collateral against it for funding on an as-needed basis, and they value those loans, assets at par. Let me make a crystal clear example. If you bought a 10-year Treasury note back a year ago, well, they weren't yielding hardly anything. And as rates started ticking up, the value of those lost money. Whether you bought a 3-year note, 10-year note, 2-year note, those rates rose. So if you had low interest rate, pick the instrument, bonds, treasuries, whatever, and those rates went up, the value of those went down. But if you hold it to maturity, you're not going to lose. So in effect, the Fed put a backstop in there. And I don't want to hear about socializing losses. That's not what happened here. So, we accuse the Democrats of stuff a lot of times. In this case, I got to call out some on the right who are saying, no, this was a mistake. I got news for you. Had they not done this, you wouldn't know what a mistake looked like. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about what happened there. And we'll have time. This will get sorted out. We'll find out. There'll be an examination. Saw a headline earlier today. The Justice Department and the Fed are already looking into, how the management handled this, particularly at Silicon Valley Bank. Now, let me get off the banking thing here and let's get on to some economics. Okay. Inflation numbers came out, 6% inflation in the month of February on an annualized basis. It's down slightly from the 6.4 in January. Folks, that's still a big number. It's a very big number. So these interest rate hikes have had some effect. Now there's a belief out there that with the issues that happen in the banking, lending will be curtailed. People are going to want to make sure they don't have bad loans on the books. And that will help to slow down the economy. I happen to agree with that. I think with the shock that the system has gone through from last week until today, there is going to be some reckoning here. And I expect that the inflation rate will come down. It's not going to be 2% by the end of the year. I don't see that happening. But if we're sitting here at 6 on an annualized basis right now, as these interest rates, the Fed meets next week, they're likely to raise rates 25 basis points and stop. That's my opinion. Some on Wall Street have said, no, they're not, they shouldn't raise at all. They might be right. But the Fed has said previously, just a week ago, they anticipated another round of 25 basis point increase. There had been talk of 50 basis point increase on the table prior to the debacle of last week, but now that's off the table. So, one thing about raising interest rates, it's a lagging effect. It takes a while to get into the system. But now, if the economy does slow based upon a curtailment in lending and a general idea to be more cautious, then you could see the inflation rate come back down. I'm not buying for 1 second people making the comment that, by stemming the bank run, that's going to be an inflationary event. No, it's not. It's actually the opposite of that. So the objective that the Fed has been working with is to try to get the inflation rate down to 2%. They're going in the right direction, but it's been slow and sticky. So we have to stay on top of that. Now, one thing is happening, again, Facebook, it's now known as Meta, they came out and announced that they're going to be laying off an additional 10,000 employees. Folks, that's a big number for a company like that. And this comes on the heels of Amazon making announcements. A lot of technology companies are laying off people. Why? Well, because they're shrinking. People are realizing that, hey, we can't have everybody doing stuff that's not focused primarily on efficiencies. Now, I'm not going to get into individual stories, but this news was received extremely well on Wall Street. Facebook stock's up like $11 earlier today. So you are going to see in some areas, I'm expecting the unemployment rate to tick up a little bit. Now it's sitting at 3.7% right now, 3.6, 3.7. Economies don't go into a recession with 3.6% unemployment. It just doesn't happen. But we have to continue to monitor how these things develop, because as you can see now, we live in a lightning fast world. Things change quickly. The velocity of money is much faster. Billions of dollars are moved in an instant. So the overall economy, though, I do expect is going to continue to do pretty well. But keep in mind, folks, there is going to be likely tightening, and there will be some increase in unemployment. I fully expect that. But thank goodness we're not fighting another battle at this point with the credibility of the banking system. I think we came through that pretty good. Now, will there be technology layoffs more? Sure. Is there too much of stuff? Well, that's what a wringing out is. One thing about capitalistic society, it runs, when excess is built up, they have a tendency to be able to wring them out. A la housing back in the mid 2006, 7, 8 era, and technology is sort of feeling that effects right now. Look, there's pockets of the economy that are still somewhat out of control. When we were broadcasting from South Florida, we told you about that. Some of the craziness going on there on the real estate market, insane. That stuff will work itself out. Similar type situation with this crypto stuff going on. So keep the faith, folks. The United States has the best economy, maybe not quite as good now as it was before, but it's still very, very good. And that's why it's a magnet. People want to come into this country. All right, let me get out one other thing on the economy and workers. We got a good court ruling out in California where a federal judge has ruled that gig workers, like the people that drive the Ubers and the Lyfts and the DoorDashes deliveries, they're not employees, that they're contractors. And that was a law that was passed back in 2020 to confirm that. It was overturned. Now federal judges stepped in and said, no, these are subcontractors. They're not employees. And that's a win for really everyone. Because, you talk to some of these people, the Lyft driver, the Uber driver, they don't have a boss telling them, hey, you have to go to work. They decide as a contractor, they want to drive or they don't want to drive. Come on. That was a good call. So that's a very positive thing now. And along the economic piece here, there was a bit of bright news here also that came out of the administration. After years of review, the Biden administration finally approved 3 out of 5 projects called the Willow Project. Basically, ConocoPhillips, which is a major oil company, has been leasing land in northern Alaska. How many of you have been to northern Alaska? Not many. Okay. Well, in a certain northeast section of northern Alaska, there's a lot of oil. A boatload of it, folks. And the Biden administration had approved 3 of 5 drilling projects. And the impact of this is enormous. Politicians in the state of Alaska, both Democrat and Republican, all the elected officials, almost unanimously had requested the Biden administration approve this. At its peak, it will be able to produce 180,000 barrels of oil per day. Folks, that is an enormous help to the United States. But no, the climate greenies, the environmental wackos, they went ballistic over this. They go, Biden, you promised us you wouldn't do this. Folks, if we don't produce the oil ourselves, we're going to buy it from foreign countries, some of which are not our friends. That's why this whole thing doesn't make any sense. Why these environmental wackos and these climate nut jobs, it makes no sense what they advocate. Fortunately, there were enough Democrats also pushing this, and the Department of the Interior, the woman who heads that, she had her assistant sign off on it. People didn't want to touch it because, oh my God, it's dirty oil. Oh, we can't have a Democrat doing that. But we had a Democratic president who felt that apparently there was a reasonable balance struck. I don't know why he didn't just approve all 5 of them, but at least they did 3 out of 5, and the CEO of ConocoPhillips said he was happy with it. Again, folks, we have to produce our own oil. Yes, the country's moving to less dependent oil, more electric vehicles. It takes time. It takes time to do that. And you can't just sit here and say, well, we're going to stick our head in the sand. Oh, no, we're not going to drill to appease these climate wackos. Why? Because we have a country to run. And unfortunately, whether they like it or not, oil is the engine of growth in this country. You turn off the oil spigot, you turn off the economy. Look, some of those environmental wackos, they love that stuff. But again, think about what I'm saying here, folks. Again, we didn't get everything we wanted on this, but at least the country, when this thing's become fully operational, 2,500 jobs are going to be created just to build this facility. And folks, it's going to take years before this oil starts flowing. It's not like turning on a spigot. It's going to happen tomorrow. No, the whole facility has to get built. It's in rugged terrain. The temperatures are horrific. It's northeast Alaska. I mean, it's near the Arctic. And then once it's flowing, billions of tax revenue will flow into the state of Alaska and the federal government. Now, you ask me what's a better deal? Us producing our own oil, helping fund the state of Alaska, fund the federal government. God knows the federal government needs money. It's still running $1 trillion deficits. Or going out and having to buy oil that we need from somebody else who's going to drill for it. I mean, this is why these climate activists, it just drives me nuts. Yes, we want to move as green as we can, but we don't want to forget the economy runs on oil. And these nut jobs don't seem to understand it. It's insane. Again, listen to what I'm saying to you, folks. We cut through the BS. The Biden administration made, whether they liked it or not, and they probably didn't, but they made the right call. And I give them credit for it. We're not going to stick our head in the sand here and just always criticize. People say, Mark, you criticize Democrats a lot. Yeah, when they deserve criticism, we do. But when they make the right call, you got to give them credit. That's why we always tell you we're going to cut through the BS. And in this case, again, we support the decision that they make. All right, got a few minutes left. Let's talk a little politics here. They look like, that they're targeting Trump over this Stormy Daniels thing. Okay, I'm not going to give you too much details because, frankly, most people couldn't give a rip about it. They really don't. If that's the worst thing Trump did, and if he gets indicted for that over sending hush money to Stormy Daniels, again, we don't know all the story, but various reports in the media say, that's where the area is focused on. I'm going to tell you, if that's it, boy, you're going to get it'll be splashy headlines for a while. Yeah, former president gets indicted, if it happens. But boy, if that's what this is all about, man. So, but that prosecutors do appear to be targeting him over that Stormy Daniels payment. And you thought, my God, that's really old. Well, it is. This dates back prior to the 2016 presidential campaign. What year are we? 2023? 7 years ago? Come on. It almost, I don't know. Let's see what happens in it, but that does appear where it's going. And then, speaking of politics, CNN came out with a poll, and it only had 4 candidates in it, but Trump and DeSantis are basically neck and neck. I think Trump had 37%, DeSantis 39%, and then Nikki Haley and Mike Pence, who hasn't announced yet, but looks like he may, we're down about 7% each. Again, very early, folks, polling early, but it does show that if DeSantis gets in this race, he will be a formidable challenger. And frankly, again, we reported from Florida for the last few months. He's my governor. I support him. I generally agree with his positions. He's done an exceptionally good job as governor in Florida. Folks, 800 to 1,000 people a day are moving into that state. And they're not going there because he's doing a bad job. Okay. Yeah, the weather's good most of the time. For about 6 months. Okay. But it is hot and sticky in the summer there. But again, the policies in the state of Florida, there's a reason people are moving there. Now, again, he hasn't announced yet, but the Florida legislature's in session right now and likely will finish that in May. So I would target sometime May or June if DeSantis decides to get in this race. But right now, he's doing very well in the polls. Now, one thing I disagree with him on, again, we call it straight here, virtually every position he's taken I have agreed with, but there's one I don't. He did an interview, and he was talking about the money that we're spending in Ukraine and the material, the tanks, the weapons. And he said, that's a dispute between Russia and Ukraine. The United States really shouldn't be involved at the level it is. I don't agree with that at all. Okay, I can still support DeSantis and not agree with every position of his, but I don't agree with him on that. We need to continue to do everything we can to help the Ukrainians against this brutal Russian attack. Folks, you and I know, the Russians take Ukraine, they will not stop there. They have to be stopped. And NATO is doing their part generally, but without the support of NATO and the U.S., the Russians would have already conquered Ukraine. So no, I don't agree with DeSantis' position. I know a lot of conservatives feel, we should be taking that money and spending it. We got to protect our borders. We got problems here. We're 31.4 trillion in debt. We got to address it. Yeah, those are all points. But you can't abandon Ukraine. I don't think so at all. Now, he's not suggesting abandoning it. I'm not trying to put words in DeSantis' mouth. But he did sort of lean in the area of we need to focus more on our country, than helping Ukrainians. I don't agree with that. But look, we're talking now in March of 2023, and we don't have an election until November of 24. Okay, so there's time for changes there. But that's one I'd like to see him moderate his position on. And then finally, Senator Mitch McConnell was released from the hospital. He fell, he tripped at a fundraiser. He ended up with a cracked rib. So now he's in rehab. So we wish the senator well on his recovery and look forward to having him back in the Senate. So, folks, we're covered a lot of ground on a lot of things, and we'll be back on Thursday to talk about it a little bit more because it's fast developing a lot of these stories. But again, the theme here, we always try to tell you, we're going to cut through the BS and the propaganda. And so don't shoot us if we occasionally say a Democrat administration did something right, because generally we're on the opposite side of where they're coming down. But on these two issues today, the banking situation and the oil situation, I think they handled both of them quite well. All right, be back on Thursday. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening. I'm telling you, folks, it's chilly and rainy out here, unlike in Florida where it was in the mid-80s and sunny. But anyhow, we'll deal with that. Look, lots going on. We will stay on top of it for you. See you on Thursday.